Hello and welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia. This week I'm reviewing the episode Hopes. Now, without further ado, let's get into the review and kick off with the positives, all the things I enjoyed about this episode, and we kick off with the headline positives. This episode does everything the previous one should have done and then so. Every element that was introduced was used effectively and efficiently. I liked the couple plot twists and turns that we had throughout the episode, and I enjoyed the post-credit sequence bit for what it was, though I'll discuss that in greater detail later on. So we're going to kick off this review by talking about something a little bit more procedural before we get into the more subtextual and the usual thing of just talking about the more fun things within the episode. I feel that this episode did everything the previous one should have done and then so. Let's just be blunt. Let's address the elephant in the room here. There is a lot happening in this episode. Our attention is being dragged here, there and everywhere. However, with this episode, it is delivered in a far more effective way, with events feeling as though they lead into one another and having a bit more of a knock-on effect on everything else. This doesn't feel like it's some kind of scattershot thing of, oh, what's happening here, what's happening here, what's happening here, whether our focus just being snapped and pulled along here, there and everywhere. No, we're getting something that's a bit more focused. It feels like there's a greater narrative unfolding here, rather than getting the sketch show equivalent of a superhero action anthology. And sometimes, you know, those knock-on effects aren't going to be direct. There's going to be this, well, you know the kind of things I'm referring to. It's more indirect. It's more of a sense of dread or optimism in us as an audience. This all ends up creating this sense that we're building up things. There's this greater sense of momentum, constantly building, growing, evolving with time. This gradual building up of the tension as more is unfolded to us, from leaving us with wrapping stuff up from previous week's episode, as well as setting up stuff for the remaining few episodes of this season. Nothing in this episode feels like it's just there for the sake of being there, with everything having some kind of justification for it happening in some form or another. I will admit that Lady Nagant's involvement here does slightly lean into that. It does kind of have this feeling that there was more planned for her, but it was abandoned or cut back. I don't know if there's going to be anything more with her going forward. I really don't know, but one of the more interesting things I found with her scene is the fact that it essentially just flat out said that Hawks has become the government's new cleaner, like she once was, and it explains why he was selected to infiltrate the Meta Liberation Army rather than some more lesser known superhero or someone who might have quirks and abilities that are better suited to a job like that. To be blunt, it may have been explained a little bit earlier on in the series as to why they picked him in a lot more of a just frank way, just an outright just confirmation, yeah, this is your job, this is what you do, so you now have to go and do it. But I'm going to be honest, it's been a long while since it might have been explained. Gentle Criminal's involvement also kind of runs the risk of feeling like they're just being there for the sake of being there. But with him, it does feel like there's a little bit more to go off with him. With Lady Nagant, it does feel like there's been this great opportunity that has been missed to really round off her character and give her more of an emotive send-off. Like when we see the scene where she's firing out the bullets and you start seeing her blood pouring out of her as her stitching starts to come loose and her wounds start to open. It feels as though we're building up to a grand crescendo moment where it's going to be something like she's going to keep firing these shots off regardless of how much kind of damage it's going to be doing to her. And you can kind of imagine that kind of scene that would end up happening in a comic book or a manga or a TV show or a movie where she's firing it out, she's having flashbacks of all the horrible things she's done, and as time goes by those memories start to become clearer and happier and kinder as she remembers why she wanted to be a hero in the first place before eventually succumbing to her wounds, and then it's left ambiguous whether or not she survived or not. We don't end up getting that with her, and with Gentle Criminal, his job is just to stand there and hold up the big rock. Again, they do a little bit more to justify him being there, and there is a bit more of an emotive reason for him to be there, with him on the one hand being happy that no one can see him doing this, but at the same time lamenting that he doesn't have his moment in the spotlight, his moment to prove himself to everyone that he wasn't the fuck up that people thought he was. And he ends up getting that because you get the shot of the business students filming him, and their involvement in all of this is a little bit more justified, even though I'll admit I don't think it really needed to be. Like the whole gag of them just doing this for the sake of doing a YouTube documentary, as kind of twisted, as weird as that might be, I like that. I like that kind of cynical connection to it. But still, their reason for doing it being, oh, we're doing this to show that the world does need heroes, or whatever their exact wording was, is fine. But again, I think it kind of sands off a few edges here and there. But hey, I like as much as I don't like cynical superhero TV shows and such, I don't mind a slight hint of cynicism in them. But with that said, what I do say is I like the gradual build-up with all of this. The series of events we get unfolding here. It feels as though we're gradually building up to this epic crescendo moment towards the end of this episode. We have in this episode Tomura's Voyage of Self-Rediscovery. I will admit that whilst I like the idea that he's starting to kick back against All for One and starting to push back against him and his influence and starting to come into his own a little bit more, in a way that I think certain other fans wish he had done a lot sooner. You know, not to get into it, I know a lot of people would have preferred that he killed off All for One and then became the big bad, but whatever, we deal with the hand that we're dealt. But my issue with all this is the line that he talks about, oh, he hid a part of himself in his heart, and I think that it would have been just as easy to just go, oh, his deep-seated resentment and hatred for All for One, or him simply having darker motives, was the thing that kept him pure and kept him from just disappearing and fading away. Though, to be fair, though, he may be speaking a little bit more metaphorical. Oh, he always kept true to himself. He always kept true to the person he was deep down, deep within his heart. More so than a literal, oh, I hid a shard of my personality in my heart, ready for a day like this. Which might be the case again, but at the same time with a program like this, where thoughts and thought spaces and dreams have a bit more of a literal tangential implications and meanings, that he might literally have just done that, but we don't really know. We then, of course, get the little bit with Kirigiri not knowing who he's working with now as a result of all that, with him just got panicking, going, oh, who am I working with? Is it Tomura? Is it All for One? Oh, I don't know what I'm doing, guys. And that feels like it's building up for a more of an emotive bit. He does save a Razorhead and Present Mike, and I want to see where they end up going with all of that. I just hope that it's placed perfectly within whatever episode it's involved in, rather than it being one of a number of scenes that week when we end up getting up to it. This gradual building of events goes from the relative quiet of the battle between Midori and Tomura, and then starts to pivot into stuff we get with Hawks and the other heroes at the Gungan Villa thing. And I have to say is that I liked the bait and switch where you thought that Hawks was dying. I think that was good. But I will be honest, I knew they weren't going to kill him there and then, not because of spoilers, but because it would have been such an ignoble death. And there's a part of me that thinks it would have been cooler or more interesting had that happened, that he doesn't get this epic, heroic sacrifice moment, he doesn't have this big final speech, he's just off there and then, and everyone just has to deal with that. And just the shock and terror of that this is what All for One can do. He just doesn't care. The heroes that are going up against him are just fodder, just things that are in his way that he just needs to cut through, and that would have been a great moment to do that. We don't get that, and then it's used as a mechanism to reintroduce the other school, whose name escapes me, and they just they wander into all of this like the characters from a whole other program. It's been a long time since we've seen them. I will admit that their absence from this program has been kind of conspicuous. I suppose it is a justification in universe for them to being so absent as they had done, but still, the way they're presented, the way that they're brought into it, it kind of feels like you could have just introduced a character from Vigilantes and it would have had the same kind of effect. The way they banter, the way they talk, the way they carry themselves, it really does feel like a crossover episode with a whole different program. I don't mind them being there. I think they're interesting characters in and of themselves, but for me, the problem I end up having is that it's one of those moments that it feels as though as soon as one side in this equation is pulling ahead, something else comes along to try and readdress the balance. As soon as the villains look like they're starting to get ahead, something will happen for the heroes. And as soon as the heroes look like they're getting ahead, something will happen for the villains. And it happens almost instantaneously, within an episode or so of it happening. Like right now, we have this army of self-replicating clones, and the solution for that, more heroes. The arena that Tomura and Deku is fighting in is falling. So they're suddenly gentle criminal. Bakugo has had his heart broken. Folded Ninja Guy comes in to stop it. That as soon as something big and dramatic happens, another character comes into it to almost solve it. And I don't like that, and that's something we'll be reflecting upon when we get into the season-long overview. But I will say is that the exact series of events that we have in this episode could quite easily have happened an episode or two down the line, and it would have been just as effective for me, if not more so, because the tension of, oh crap, things are going south, would be a hell of a better way in building them up to coming into this and make their appearance more impactful than, oh, there's this army of monsters. Oh, no, there isn't anymore. As seems to be the case here and then. Like I said, again, the twists and turns that we have here, their appearance, the hypothetical death of Hawks, all good stuff in and of itself. It's just the timing of it that I don't like. Speaking of timing, we move to, I want to talk about that post-credit sequence. Like, I like what was revealed there, even if it was the most bloody clumsy way in doing it they could possibly do so. You get the bit of present Mike narrate it and going, as bad as things were for the heroes and the villains, things could get worse. Granted, not long, given how all this is unfolding. As soon as one side gets a little bit ahead, something comes along to thwart that, but whatever. Things could get worse. And then you got Froppy coming into it going, as bad as things are, things will get worse. By my estimation, things are bad now, but from a certain percentage, things get worse. But if they haven't got worse, that would be bad, and things getting bad could get worse, because worse things would be bad from where we are, because worse things getting bad would be bad for us all. And I'm just thinking, well, what the fuck are you talking about? Look, I know I'm dyslexic and you're speaking Japanese, but it feels like I'm having a stroke. What the fuck are you trying to say here? Like, just weird word salad of just repeating almost exactly what President Mike said in the most clumsy and dense way possible. Like, it is one of those things where it just feels like they could have, brevity is the soul of wit here. They could have narrowed that down to something a lot more digestible, because it just feels like this block of just nonsensical muttering, which I know is rich coming from me given my history of nonsensical muttering, but still. But regardless, whilst as wonky as that stuff is, the sequence of events that we get with Toga being within her little thought space, being deep within her head, trying to comprehend everything, and why she can't create the clones of the villains is great. The look of panic and horror on her face as she tries to understand is cool. The expression shots that we get in this episode are great, particularly that one with All for One midway through the episode. They're all great little bits when we end up getting them. I think the potential implication as to why she isn't being able to create these clones and these copies isn't because she doesn't love them sufficiently to then make the clones and then make the copies. It's more so that either it would be almost like using more than one quirk, which she can't do, or alternatively, it's the fact that she's so consumed by her own desire and burning passion for revenge that it's stopping her from doing it, because you then immediately get those shots of other clones going, destroy heroes, kill them all, fuck them up, And then she'd been a little bit more in control of herself, maybe she'd be able to do that, but still, with that said, and whilst we're still on the same topic, let's move into the negatives and say that my big negative for this episode is the post-credit sequence. Like, in and of itself, word salad aside, I think it's a great series of events. I think it's interesting. I think the cinematography of it is good. I like the fact it's bringing these characters back into a little bit more focus than they have been for the past few episodes or so. I like the way that it could be potentially set up going forward. But with all that said, I just kind of think to myself, but why though? Why did this need to be a post-credit sequence thing? Like, it's a good thing that I checked the runtime of this episode, because otherwise I might have skipped it. There was a part of me genuinely that was wondering when it saw the few minutes later little caption thing that we're about to get into something like a tease for the upcoming movie. Granted, not the upcoming movie, because it's been and gone in Japan and it's not coming out in the rest of the world until a couple weeks time, but still there's a part of me was thinking, okay, is this going to be a promo thing? Is this going to be a big important thing? Is this going to be some little side character thing? No, it's a major part of the story that explains a circumstance regarding a certain character, yet it's done as a post-credit sequence. And I don't get that. I don't get the decision to do that, because it could quite easily fit in with the rest of the episode had it just been slotted in earlier. Or maybe, to be fair, they looked at this the series of events and thought to themselves, yeah, this would be a bit too congested if we put it in amongst this, so we got to put it at a different point. But at that point, why not just put it in its own episode, or put it as part of next week's episode? Granted, that would mean that this episode would have run a little bit shorter, but there's nothing saying that you couldn't have done some form of filler to just drag this out a little bit more. Isn't it weird that filler has become such a... Maybe not filler, maybe padding would be a better way in talking it. Maybe, well, actually, no, padding would be worse, but still, maybe a little bit more filler would have been put in here and there to just pace things out a little more for this season. Maybe it would have felt a little bit better, which feels odd given how taboo a subject filler is, but still, with that said, the overview. I think this episode is good. I think it's a solid episode and does everything the previous episode should have done and then so. Last week's episode was about build and set up for future events. It was the connecting tissue to two major plot points. This week's episode, you can argue whether or not there's any major plot points in this week's episode, and it feels, again, a little bit more like setup, but how it ends up doing that feels like there is more of a story here. It doesn't feel like an anthology. It doesn't feel like a sketch show. Our attention isn't being pulled from here, there, to anywhere or everywhere. It is this focused, drilled down thing that we can sit there and go, okay, we know what's going on here, we can digest it, and with the pacing being what it is, we can fully comprehend everything that's going on here, and our attention isn't being dragged here, there, and everywhere. That's good. I think the episode itself is good. I think it kind of lacks a little bit more of an emotional impact to wait for it, and the big emotionally impactful moment came in a post-credit sequence, which is still part of the episode, though it should have been arguably part of the episode. With all that said and done, however, it's time to find out what you thought about last week's episode, as now it's time for Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner, and I've just realised something. Okay, so last week's episode I didn't have any notes for because I was incredibly rushed and I didn't have time to get stuff done. And I just realised I've been making reference to the episode from the week before last when I was talking about, oh, this week's episode did everything that last week's episode should have done. I really meant the previous episode, the one that was about Butterfly Effect or whatever it was called, rather than The Chain Thus Far, because I actually liked the episode The Chain Thus Far. I thought it was emotively impactful and a really great episode, and I feel sad for having kind of slandered it. But in any case, let's talk about your comments from the previous episode. And we first off begin with Big X1, who says, this episode was awesome. It was way better than the last one. I didn't think we'd see Gentle Criminal back. Thank you for your comment. And maybe I should have rewatched my previous review before this week's review. But hey, you get the idea now. Last week's episode I think was good, great, and really impressive. The week before that was lesser. So yeah, just kind of recontextualise my comments a bit. And next comment comes from Scott TV Gamer, who says, my only really complaint is I was hoping we're hoping for this episode to end at a different point. But fun fact about the Feel Good Inc. stuff, it may have actually been set up a bit back in the villain arc in Season 5. Skeptic mentions that Reed Destro has only failed him once in his life, and it seems that the incident with Labrava is what he's referring to. Thank you for the comment, and that is something I'll have to check out when I get a chance to. I mean, now that it's been said, I think there's something in the back of my mind that's flicking about it that kind of just comprehend and remembers it a little bit. We'll have to see about that. I think I'm long overdue a chance of just going through all of this and just watching it more casually. Because from pretty much the past couple of years or so, I've just been doing the reviews rather than just watching it as a fan. But still, thank you for your comments. Thank you for your thoughts and feelings. I've shared mine slightly wonkily with this week's episode. And let me know what you thought about it. Do you love this week's episode? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below. And you will be read out in next week's review. Well, that said done, thank you all for listening and see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!